Welcome back to On Air with Lupton, and I'm your host, James Lupton. Today's guest is football commentator Ian Darke. Ian's best known for being a voice of football for ESPN and TNT Sports. In this podcast, we talk about the first game Ian ever commentated on, which had 0 listeners, getting his big break after an interview with Muhammad Ali, and a great Lionel Messi story. I hope you enjoy the listen. Please subscribe and rate the channel, as it is greatly appreciated. And now for the interview. Ian, firstly, thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate you joining me. We're going to talk through your career as a broadcaster, but before we do get into the nitty-gritty, I want to go back a little bit and talk a little bit about your upbringing. Obviously, you're clearly a sport lover. Has that always been the case?
Oh, yeah, I was playing football as long as I can remember. My brother was about 5 years older than me, so I was always playing against older kids, and I think that toughened me up a bit in the back streets of Southsea and Portsmouth, where I grew up. Yeah, fell in love with sport, and my favourite present every Christmas was Charles Buchan's Football Annual, which I kind of read cover to cover before I opened up any other presents. So, yeah, I think you can say I was sports mad from a pretty early point.
Was it always football? Was it always your main love?
Yeah, football is definitely my main love. I grew up playing it. My dad supported Portsmouth. My older brother did as well. So loved the game. But I grew to love other sports as well. I kind of fell in love with cricket when I got to about 12 and pretended in the back garden that I was, Ted Dexter and Colin Cowdrey and players like this, and great players of the era, hitting balls back against the wall with a cricket bat and pretending I was Australian stars as well. And and I grew to love athletics and later boxing as well, and horse racing. So there aren't many sports I don't dislike. I'm not crazy about rugby and one or two others, but I sat glued to the Olympics like everybody else.
Absolutely. I mean, talking about growing up, and you mentioned obviously you loved your football. You got to 12, you started to enjoy your cricket as well. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not every child's dream to grow up being a sports broadcaster. When did when did that become an ambition for you, Ian?
Much later, actually. Like every kid, I wanted to be a professional footballer. I was pretty good at schoolboy level. I played for my county schools team, that kind of thing. And I dreamt that maybe one day I'd be taken on by some club, but I was nowhere near good enough. That's the truth of it. But I always had a thing in the back of my mind that I wanted to be a journalist from when I was about 13 and to write. And I remember writing to Ken Jones, one of the famous sports writers of the time, on the Daily Mirror. He sent me a lovely, encouraging letter. So I went into when I got my A levels at school. I was in Buckinghamshire then. I went on a journalism course for a year. Passed a few exams, got a job on a local paper. So I did about 4 or 5 years in local papers before I went to BBC Radio Leicester. I did news and sport there, and then I went to the BBC Radio Sports Room in London to join what was really a top-class academy of sports broadcasters. You just felt in awe being around them.
Talk to me about, do you remember the first job you'd done as a broadcaster? The first time you commentated on a game? Take me back.
Yeah, it was hospital radio in Portsmouth, actually. Portsmouth against Middlesbrough. And what happened was the local fire chief, I think it was, used to do the commentaries for the hospital radio station. He was ill, couldn't do it. They sent a message to the newspaper where I worked. Could anyone come down and fill in? So I put my hand up for it and commentated on Portsmouth against Middlesbrough with a player of the era called Harry Harris, who was injured, and he was my co-commentator. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I never did any more broadcasting again for about a decade after that.
From that moment, you mentioned you didn't do it again for a decade. Why was it? Did you not get the bug, or was it something that's never opportunity arose at the time?
Yeah, I didn't even think I could do it. I was doing newspaper stuff, only provincial newspaper reporting, nothing very important at all. But it never entered my head that I could maybe make a career broadcasting. Not until BBC local radio started, and I started to see adverts for jobs in BBC local radio, and I saw one at Leicester, applied for it, and was lucky enough to get it. And the rest of it was followed on from that.
Looking back now, after your long career so far in broadcasting, how special is it to look back and think that the first game that you commentated on was a Portsmouth game?
Not that special, really, because what we found out at the end of the season was that nobody'd heard any of the hospital radio commentaries that year because of some technical glitch. But which was funny. No, I mean, yeah, it is kind of ironic that it was them. You know, I was kind of born around the time they were a top first division club and winning the title, that sort of thing, in a hospital near the ground. So I guess there is quite a nice symmetry to that now you mention it.
Talk to me a little bit about the gaps. You mentioned a decade there before you went back into broadcasting again and sort of realised that you could make a career out of it. What was you doing? You mentioned newspaper stuff. Was it all essentially reporting on football? Was it other sports? What was your role?
All hands to the pumps, really, when you work on a local paper. I mean, remember, I was surrounded by pretty senior reporters. I was just a junior reporter at the time. So you had to do things like go and report people's golden weddings, road accidents, that sort of thing, council meetings, quite dull stuff, really, on the face of it. But you learn your trade and you learn to be accurate. And I think, the journalistic training I got has played quite a big part in later life.
When was it, or did it ever, in terms of the written side of it for the papers, did it turn into just sports for you?
That kind of happened when I went to the BBC in London, because when I was at Radio Leicester, I used to do like reading the news and do some news reporting and interviewing, but I do the sports spot as well from time to time on the station. There was only me and a guy called Dennis Coath, lovely guy, who went on to work on East Midlands ITV. Him and I kind of had a great rapport between us. And I started to do some of the interviews down at Leicester City's ground, that kind of thing, with people like Jimmy Bloomfield, who was the manager at the time, and Keith Weller, no longer with us, sadly, Frank Worthington, all those people. So I got the idea that I really would like to work in the BBC Radio Sports Room in London. But that was a big ask, to be honest with you, because they really only took on people who were full-time sports people. But I managed to do a very good interview, though I say so myself, with the boss at the time, a guy called Bob Burrows. And he basically said at the end of it, I'll tell you what, we're going to take a chance on you. So I got signed up on a trial basis initially to work on, Sport on 2 as it then was, Sport on 5 now, and Sports Report. And after 6 months, they said, yeah, we're going to take you. So I was mighty relieved about that. And I had the time of my life, to be honest, there, working among great names like Desmond Lynam and Jim Rosenthal, Tony Adamson, Gerald Williams, Chris Ray, Christopher Martin Jenkins. They were household names. Brian Butler. It was a brilliant experience.
You mentioned about you was on trial there for the first sort of 6 months. Talk to me about that process and wanting to grab this opportunity with both hands. How motivated were you to get this on a permanent position?
Oh, very motivated, because it was a very hard school. For instance, if they asked you for a 50-second report on something and you did 51 seconds, you'd know all about it the next morning from the editor, who would say, well, if everyone did 51 seconds when they asked them for 50, the program had overrun by a minute. So when we tell you a time, don't exceed it. And they listened very carefully to your words, how you did it. So it was a tough examination. And yeah, I'm sure I messed a few things up, but I must have got enough of them right to get taken on.
Absolutely. When was the moment you felt that you'd cracked it, you'd accomplished your big break?
Well, I'd been there for about a year, and I was kind of regarded as a fringe player, I guess you'd say, in football terms, a squad player, not getting that many chances. It was hard to get chances because there were so many good broadcasters ahead of you. So I'd be doing things like the 3rd and 4th division roundup on Sports Report, which was a tough thing to do because 20 past 5 and you got to get it all together and do a really good minute and a half piece into the program. So it was harder than it sounded. But my big break came because I was one of the few people in the office who knew that much about boxing. And Desmond Lynam was on the verge of his huge stellar career in TV, but he was the BBC Radio boxing commentator at the time. He couldn't do a Muhammad Ali fight in Las Vegas, which was Muhammad Ali against Larry Holmes. So they sent me to Vegas to cover this fight. It wasn't a commentary fight. I was doing reports and interviews. But I was sent out to this fight. I didn't know boxing enough to cover it really, and I'd certainly never been to America, so it was a baptism of fire being among all of that. But the Fleet Street guys helped me no end. I got the interviews I needed, including one with Muhammad Ali. And when I came back from that, I think I was looked at it as somebody who'd kind of earned their spurs a little, and they started to give me some bigger stuff from that point.
What was that like to almost throw yourself in the deep end, I suppose, to go out there into a different sport, out of your comfort zone, and with Muhammad Ali, arguably one of the most charismatic sports people ever?
Yeah, well, it's all downhill, isn't it? After that, if you've covered Muhammad Ali in your first fight, but you have to get by. So I listened and I learned, and I'm sure I did a few things wrong, but I also, in my naivety, the very first thing I did when I got to Vegas was to go to the gym where Muhammad Ali was working and shadow boxing and try to get an interview with him. And of course, he loved everybody from England. He really did. So I couldn't go wrong. I got the interview at the first time of asking, sent it back to London, and I got some very good reviews from my editors saying, "Hey, well done. No, we weren't expecting this. Not this soon." So yeah, it was fun to cover, except the fight itself, because Muhammad Ali got badly beaten up in that fight. He was too old to be fighting then, and didn't do him too much good. He was 38 by then, and it was a systematic beating he got at the hands of Larry Holmes. It was a big story, though, from our point of view of people reporting it on national radio.
Absolutely. Let's stick on the theme of boxing. Obviously, you did quite a bit of boxing work. You mentioned that fight, also Holyfield Tyson 2, the bite fight. Let's just talk about boxing in a whole. How different is it to work on boxing than it is to football or any other sports?
Very different indeed. I think the accessibility to boxers and fight camps is way better in nearly all cases than it is in football, which has become much more of a closed shop now. Everything, the players, well, they build walls around them really, and if you want to get anywhere near them to do interviews or have access, you've got to go through the PR operation, and the press relations guy might not want that player to be doing any interviews at the time. So it's pretty hard work. Whereas in boxing, they're always trying to sell the tickets and sell themselves, make themselves marquee names. So you don't have to pick up the phone really, and you can chat away to just about anybody. I mean, the only fighter I found was elusive was Mike Tyson, because he was so big at the time and he was bothered by so many people, and he didn't care too much for all the hype surrounding him, that he wasn't available very often. But nearly all the fighters were absolutely a delight to cover. I have to say that. They're grounded guys who risk their lives every time they go in the ring. They're brave beyond measure. And all of them, really, it was a privilege and a pleasure to cover them. People like Barry McGuigan, Joe Calzaghe, maybe not so much Nassim Hamed. He could be a little bit difficult, but Lennox Lewis. It was all good.
Obviously, you mentioned it's the first time you went out there to the Muhammad Ali Larry Holmes fight. It was out of your comfort zone. It was a different sport to what you're used to, and the way you had to adapt is something that you have to do quick on your feet in sport when you're changing, especially when you're trying to make an impression as well. Do you think that your ability to adapt so well is part of your success through your long career?
I think every broadcaster's got to do that. I mean, sometimes, and you'll have heard it at the Olympic Games, a lot of the guys who were doing the commentaries were on sports they don't cover from one Olympics to the next, and probably some of them were covering the sport for the first time. But they're all good professionals. They nearly all are anyway, and they'd have spent time learning those sports and talking to the people in those sports and getting the hang of it. And so learning not to say the right things, know what to be looking out for, and that's how you do it. It's called preparation, and without it, we're all nowhere.
Absolutely. You mentioned obviously that was your big break then, the Muhammad Ali interview and that fight week, and that sort of give you a bit of credibility within the companies he was working for. Talk to me about fast forward to 1992, the Premier League starts, and you're one of the main men. You've earned your stripes by this point. Talk to you about getting that and how big an opportunity that was for you as well.
A huge operation then, because picture the scene. Back in those days, football had only been live on the television on the BBC and ITV. ITV had the contract. It wasn't a big contract in terms of the kind of money we're talking about now. And then Sky came along and blew everybody else out of the water because of the size of the offer, which the Premier League guys, clubs had to take, really. It was so much money. But there was a huge amount of resentment about this. And a lot of the writers said, what is football doing going into this black hole of Sky TV? It wasn't as big then as it is now. It was, new kid on the block. It was pretty experimental, regarded as almost something of a maverick operation. So me and Martin Tyler, Martin doing the Sunday games, I did the Monday night games early on. We were really very much on trial, and you felt that the journalists and the public really were waiting with daggers drawn to really rip the coverage to shreds. Now, I'm not saying it's to our credit, but certainly the producers' credit and the directors, did a brilliant job. There were more cameras. The coverage was pretty fantastic. I'm not saying the commentary was or blowing our own trumpet or anything like that, but I think everyone was pleasantly surprised by the quality of the coverage that Sky Sports put on in those early days. But it was a big trial, and I remember our chief editor being there at Manchester City. The first Monday night game I covered was against Queen's Park Rangers, and he said to me, I won't use the swear word he used, but he said, don't mess this up. So yeah, he was under pressure. We were certainly under pressure, but we got through that test.
Just, you mentioned a little bit on it there, and I'll touch on it again. How much of a pivotal moment was the Premier League and the introduction of Sky Sports to football?
Massive, huge. It's how the Premier League, it's the start of the Premier League being the worldwide brand. You can argue about what is the best league in the world football-wise, and Spain would have a shout, wouldn't they? Especially after what's happened in the summer. Germany would have its supporters as well. But commercially, there's no doubt about it. The most successful league in the world is the one running in England, the Premier League. And it all started there. And it started from that infusion of money, that huge infusion of money from Sky, which meant that the clubs could go out and buy star players from abroad, so you have the likes of, Dennis Bergkamp and Thierry Henry arriving. I think in the first Premier League season, there are only 12 foreign players. Now, it's probably a majority of foreign players, some of the biggest stars in the world playing in this huge event, really, which is covered, and watched throughout the world. And it all started really back then when the Premier League started. And when the Premier League started, it was really just a new name on the old First Division. It was the First Division with some glossy wrapping, and now it was on Sky. But it's grown to be something much, much bigger.
Before the first game, before it all kicked off, obviously you got hired by these guys to go and be a commentator. But was you also a touch sceptical about what Sky may do to football and how it's been on terrestrial TV for so long and such a big dramatic change?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I think that, that's a fair question. I think it was a journey into the unknown for all of us. It was, the lineup then was Richard Keys and Andy Gray. Andy was the Go commentator, myself, Martin Tyler, and then the interviewers of the time. I think David Livingston was our first interviewer. Yeah, I think we were all a little bit concerned about which way it might go, the kind of reception we would get. But it was also very, very exciting because we were pioneers.
Absolutely, you were. The journey sort of keeps going. I want to go on to ESPN, another platform that you've worked for, and the American audience. Just talk to me a little bit about your journey through ESPN and how that's been for you.
Well, they've been thoroughly good to me, and I've enjoyed working for the USA broadcasters as well, for sure. That all started in 2010, really, when I covered the World Cup, again, alongside Martin Tyler in South Africa. And I got the job of covering the USA team and was lucky enough to do this goal. They were going out of the World Cup and scored in the 93rd minute with almost the last kick to go from bottom of the group and being eliminated to going to top of the group and through to the knockout phase. Landon Donovan scored the goal. And in my crazed moment, I'm a bit embarrassed about it now, but I came out with the line, "Go, go, USA." And somehow this caught on in the United States, and the country which didn't really get the game or wasn't in love with it too much, this goal became huge headline news. And my commentary clip was used left, right, and centre. I got loads of calls from American radio stations about it, and I got hired anyway. I was at Sky, and I'd been at Sky doing boxing and football for 20 years or so. But I got offered this job, and I thought, it might be the right time to try something a little bit different. And it's a move I haven't regretted. I still work for ESPN to this day.
You mentioned the American audience and how they taken to you after that clip and that where it went viral. Your words there, that Landon Donovan goal. I think it was against Algeria. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Right, James.
Talk to me about the audience and the fan base. And you mentioned there wasn't so much taken with the sport at the time. But now it's really growing, the MLS and the names that are going to the MLS. The sport really is growing in America. Have you seen that change and transition over there?
Yeah, it's still got a way to go. I think if we're honest with you, it's nowhere near up there with the likes of the NFL and the NBA, that kind of thing. It's still a little way down the list, but interest in the sport in the United States has grown, and also understanding of it's grown because they're watching all the top European leagues. They've got access to it. The Premier League is on wall to wall on NBC every weekend and has been for several years now. So it's a very different environment, and I think especially among young guys, who play the FIFA game. That's helped to turn them onto it. Call my very good friend, Derek Ray is the main voice on that. And yeah, I mean, and the amount of money now being paid by the television companies who wouldn't have gone near soccer, as they call it, way back when, they're paying king's ransoms now for the rights to show the game. So it's been a big sea change. I don't think it's ever going to be up there with NFL, but it's a significant player in the US market.
You mentioned that line, the Landon Donovan goal, "Go Go USA," and how it had gone off on a spiral and, like I say, went viral. And would you say, in your opinion, is that your most iconic line in commentary?
Well, it doesn't matter what I think, really. It only matters what other people think, because we're not broadcasting to players or coaches or other commentators. We're broadcasting to the fans. And the fans obviously thought it captured the moment. And there's an interesting thing to say about that, I think. Often you'll hear commentary clips played back, and some of them sound a little bit ridiculous in the cold light of day, say 6 weeks or maybe even 6 years later. But I always think commentary is of the moment. It's capturing a moment, and you hope you find the words to match the mood of that moment. And I think, although listening to that now, it does sound like a semi-ridiculous line, "Go, go, USA." It captured the ecstasy that team had and the fans of that team had in that moment.
You make a really good point, Ian. Commentary and broadcasting is for the fans, not the players, managers, etc. It's for the fans. Do you feel any pressure to deliver for the fans?
Yeah, I think so. And we have that pressure all the time, because if you're covering a match, say you're doing an FA Cup tie between Crewe Alexandra and, say, Sheffield United. So it's your job as the commentator in the week leading up to that game to have as much knowledge of those two teams as the people who support them. And although that game may not be the star attraction on TV this weekend, you might only be doing the third or fourth choice game, but it's life and death to the supporters of that club. They want to hear their club covered seriously and properly and in an informed way. So that's the job we have as commentators, to see if we can get that level of knowledge about the clubs. And it's not always easy to do that, for reasons I think I explained earlier on. Not everybody's that accessible, but happily there are ways and means of getting yourself up to speed.
Give us a little insight into your preparation. Say you've got a game at the weekend, It's Monday morning. What does Ian Darke do to prepare for a game?
Well, I'll keep books of every season in the Premier League. So alongside me now, um, a book for every year of the Premier League with every appearance and goal that's scored, so I can go back and check and make notes. I'm looking, and then you read widely too. You read a lot of articles, background stuff, and you maybe make a note or two if there's a clever little line about a player or something a little bit offbeat or unusual that might tickle somebody's fancy in the middle of the commentary. Can't give you an example off the top of my head, but there were several of them during the European Championships that's just followed. And then you'll try to maybe make a call or two to people at the clubs, the PR guy at the club, just check what players are fit, who are definitely going to be ruled out. Just get maybe the mood. Especially useful sometimes to talk to the reporters who cover the club week in, week out. They can tell you who's playing well, what sort of system they've been using, what the stories are around the club. So I think you have to kind of take the temperature of the game that you're covering, what the issues are, what the narrative is around these two clubs, and then build up your notes on each player to a respectable level, so you know that so and so's next goal is the 200th goal of his career or something like that. Those kind of things. We get a little bit of statistical help from the statisticians, but I think it's about, when you're actually broadcasting the game, is let the game tell you the story rather than you stuff a lot of notes and facts that people don't really want to know at them during the commentary. So I think you've got to be a good guest in people's living room.
Definitely. Ian, what has been your favourite moment of your career so far?
Whoa. Well, that's huge. I mean, I've been lucky enough to have a ringside seat on a few things, so I'd pick out two or three for you. One was commentating, because I used to do track and field commentary when I was at BBC Radio for 2 or 3 years, and I was on the 1988 Olympics, the infamous Ben Johnson gold medal race, the one where he was later stripped of the gold medal for drug taking. So that would be one, because there was tremendous pressure to get that right, him against Carl Lewis and Linford Christie. The fight between Marvin Hagler and Thomas Hearns in 1984, probably the first round of that, the greatest round of boxing there's ever been for excitement, and really did have you on the edge of your seat to cover that. And then in football, well, loads of them really. I did that game where Barcelona scored 3 goals in the last 6 minutes to rescue a tie against Paris Saint-Germain after they'd lost the first leg 4-0. Managed to win the second leg 6-1 with 3 goals right at the death. That was incredible. I did commentate on that Aguero goal. I know Martin Tyler's commentary, and rightly so, is the famous commentary on that. But I was doing that game for ESPN, so that was amazing to cover. And so too, and one always lives in my memory, is the World Cup semi-final between Brazil and Germany, when Germany incredibly won 7-1 against Brazil in Brazil, which almost defied belief. And you put the microphone at the end of down at the end of that. I was working with Steve McManaman, and I said to him, people are still going to be talking about that game in 50 years, Steve.
Have you ever been starstruck by anybody? You've met some great people, interviewed some great people. Have you ever felt the wow factor?
Yeah, I think you do. You can't really afford to be like that when you're a reporter. You can't be a fan with a microphone. But I remember once or twice in my radio days, they always wanted you to try and get celebrities. So I had to try and get an interview with Jack Nicholson at the Olympic boxing in 1984, because he was there almost every day. And I plucked up the courage in the end to ask him. And he was fantastic. He came up and sat beside me, did the interview. He signed the program. I've still got it at home. So yeah, that was definitely one occasion when I was definitely starstruck.
Fantastic story. Going back to the football, who, in your opinion, is the greatest player you've seen live, and why?
About that, Lionel Messi. He might be the greatest player, I think, who ever lived. I mean, you can keep on arguing about this one, can't you? Pele, Cristiano Ronaldo, Beckenbauer, Cruyff, the usual suspects. But Messi at his best, and you think back to that game, Barcelona against Manchester United in the Champions League final at Wembley, 2011. Barcelona, probably that was as good a performance as any club have ever put on anywhere. I don't think Manchester United had any hope with them that night. But Messi was dazzling, wasn't he? His ability to pick up the ball. And when he got the ball, I think everybody in the stadium goes quiet and is mentally on the edge of their seat. And he would get past 6 players and finish in a brilliant fashion. So just to watch him and be around him was something special. I tell you what, you mentioned starstruck. I was watching Argentina train ahead of a game against the USA. I think it was in New York. And we were allowed sort of into the training for 15 minutes. And Messi was hitting crosses from the right wing. So I thought I'd go and stand over on the right wing because they kept on hitting the balls back to him. And I thought, if one stray ball comes my way, I can just make a little pass to Messi here and give it back to him. But it never happened. I was longing to walk out that night and say, I passed the ball to Messi, you know.
Would have been some story that, Ian.
Yeah,
absolutely.
In a blind bit of notice, but it would have made me happy anyway.
Absolutely. We mentioned obviously the greatest player, and you said there the usual suspects. It's always the same crop of players. A question that I don't feel gets asked enough: who, in your opinion, is the most underrated player you've seen live, and why?
Oh, that's one of those you need a lot of previous notice for, to be honest with you, because that's a big question, isn't it? The most underrated player. Do you know what? Bobby Charlton always used to say the most underrated player who played in England's World Cup win was Nobby Stiles, the late Nobby Stiles, who was a lovely man, humble man. He could hardly see until they put contact lenses in. And I think he, in that World Cup win, he did all the work really that enabled the stars to shine. So he would spring to mind, I think. There's definitely, but that might be quite a long list, you know, of underrated players. I'm sorry I can't give you a lot off the top of my head, but I'll tell you what, I'll rack my brain. There's a lot of players who haven't maybe got all the kind of publicity and glory they maybe should have got.
Put you on the spot there, Ian.
You did, yeah. But you're allowed. You're the interviewer.
Fantastic. Took your career, successful career, great career, spanning decades. What motivates you to still keep going to this day?
It's what I do. I mean, in a way, it becomes who you are, doesn't it? Really, it's what I do. Is talk about sport, and I still enjoy doing it, and I'm still fascinated by all the characters and the storylines. And I'm lucky. I mean, I'm of an age now where you've got to think about your health a little bit and whether you can doing all the travel. I'm lucky that my health's held up to this point, and can still see and identify the players, and I can still talk about it without sounding as if I'm, falling apart at the seams. So as long as I can do it, I'd like to do it. Whether other people want me to still keep doing it, that's another matter. That's for them to judge.
A lot of people say if you work a job that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Is that how you feel about this, or are there days where it does bring its stresses and pressures?
Yeah, there's always stresses and pressures, I think, with any job. But yes, what you said at the beginning there, it is a labor of love for us. I watch football for a living, so I never have an argument with my wife, Liz, by the way, because if there's football on the TV, she knows I need to see it, really. Sometimes I'm cheating a bit. I don't always need to see it, but I always do. And I'm lucky that she loves sport as much as I do, really. Maybe not football quite as much as I do, but yeah, it's something that's part of you. So if you stopped doing it, you kind of have this fear of, well, what would life be like without it?
Brings into my next question quite nicely. You mentioned a moment ago about, you get into that age now, you want to look after your health and, potentially consider the next steps. But does retirement and stepping away from broadcasting and sport scare you a little bit?
Yeah, it does. I'll be truthful, it does. You are a little bit fearful of how you'd fill the time. On the plus side, everybody I know that has retired fills the time very well indeed. They go off traveling, they play golf, they see the world, that kind of thing. They read and find maybe a bit of time to develop a couple of hobbies they never had time to do before. So maybe that lies ahead for me. Maybe I'll learn to be very good at cooking or gardening or something like that. I've certainly been very, very bad at both of those so far.
Stuff to work on then, Ian. We've
Yeah.
spent the last sort of
Yeah. The other thing I would sometimes think is maybe it'd be a good idea to learn a language. So when I was out at the Euros for Fox Sports this last summer, I was a little bit embarrassed, as I often am, that I couldn't converse as much as I'd like to have done with German shopkeepers and people serving me coffee and that sort of thing. Making yourself understood was difficult. So I tried to do a bit of Duolingo German and Spanish. So maybe when I am retired, I'll really, really put my mind to trying to learn a language properly.
great skills to have, great skills there.
English, by the way.
Ian, we spent the last sort of 30 minutes or so discussing your career and, how you got your big break, why you got into broadcasting, etc. But I want to end the final question. Can I get one piece of advice that you'd give to any aspiring broadcasters today?
Yeah, my advice would be yourself. Don't try to act like or impersonate another commentator. And remember something we were talking about right at the start, James, and that is you are talking to people sitting at home in their living rooms. So don't be a bore. Be a good guest in their living room and don't be frightened to show your personality and when the opportunity presents itself, the lighter side too. So I always think one of the great qualities of any commentary is there's a little bit of light and shade in it. And it's not a relentless telegraphing of somewhat mundane facts. So, yep, be yourself, work hard at it, do the prep, and relax. And if it's football you're doing, or any sport really, let the event itself tell you the story without you trying to impose yourself on it, because it's not about the commentator, it's about the game.
Absolutely. Ian, I want to thank you again for your time. It's been a real pleasure to go through your career.
Thank you very much indeed, James. Nice talking to you.